Morning, everyone. I'm thankful that we've been joined by two of our distinguished co-chairs of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, Ted Lieu and Matt Cartwright, as well as, of course, Catherine Clark. We had a very robust discussion at the caucus this morning on a few different topics. There will be a resolution of disapproval related to a rule that has been proffered by the Department of Education and Secretary Betsy DeVos that would restrict the ability of individual Americans who have been defrauded as it relates to their pursuit for higher education. There's $1.5 trillion of student debt that exists in this nation. It is an anchor around the aspirations, the hopes, the dreams, and the ability of younger Americans to be entrepreneurial, to start a family, to purchase a home, and to live the American dream. And so we're going to take action this week as it relates to that proposed rule by Secretary DeVos. We had a discussion about that. We also had a discussion about what was taking place in Puerto Rico in terms of the malpractice of the administration. People of Puerto Rico, American citizens who have died in war after war on behalf of our great country, but right now have suffered through the intensity of a devastating hurricane and now earthquakes and aftershocks. Children are unable to go to school. Hospitals are not necessarily receiving patients. The people of Puerto Rico are in distress, and yet the administration refuses to spend a dime in congressionally allocated money to help out American citizens in Puerto Rico. Shame on this administration. It's an absolute disgrace, and we will continue to escalate pressure on them to do the right thing. We, of course, had a discussion that was led by Speaker Pelosi, along with Chairman Nadler and Chairman Schiff, about the next steps in the impeachment proceeding. The Speaker indicated, with the full consent of the caucus, that those articles of impeachment, 1, abuse of power, 2, obstruction of Congress, will be transmitted to the Senate at some point tomorrow. The Speaker indicated that at some point between the moment that we are in right now and the resolution being debated on the floor, that individual impeachment managers will be named. We are going to keep the focus on the stunning, corrupt abuse of power engaged in by Donald Trump, who pressured a foreign government to target an American citizen for political gain, and at the same time withheld without justification $391 million in military aid to a vulnerable Ukraine as part of a geopolitical shakedown scheme. That is why Donald Trump has been impeached, because he abused his power and obstructed a constitutionally inspired impeachment inquiry. And in America, no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States of America. The next step is simple. The Senate should conduct a fair trial. A fair trial involves witnesses and documents. What is the president hiding from the American people? Donald Trump said it was a perfect call. If it was, in fact, a perfect call, we should hear from Mick Mulvaney about that call and the actions that preceded it and followed. We should hear from John Bolton about that July 25th phone call and the geopolitical shakedown scheme that the president was engaged in to advance his own personal and political gain. The American people deserve a fair trial in the Senate. At the same time, we are going to continue our relentless focus to get things done on behalf of everyday Americans. Our relentless focus to drive down the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs. Our relentless focus to protect more than 100 million Americans with pre-existing conditions, against the president's efforts, notwithstanding his lies about health care. We're going to continue our relentless focus to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, to enact the real infrastructure plan, and defend our democracy. And with that, let me yield to our Vice Chair, Katherine Clark.
Thank you, Chairman Jeffries, and good morning. The articles of impeachment boil down to this president putting his own political gain over that of the interests of the American people. And what we see in the bills that are sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk is an extension of that. These are not talking points. They are policies that directly impact American families and could save American lives. Every day that Mitch McConnell holds up background check legislation, we lose 100 Americans to gun violence. Every day that Mitch McConnell holds up expanding health care and pursues court case to undo the ACA, 82 million Americans with pre-existing conditions worry about their ability to protect their families. Every day that Mitch McConnell stonewalls the Dream and Promise Act, 700,000 dreamers are left with their future in limbo. Every day Mitch McConnell delays the Raise the Wage Act, 33 million Americans, including 20 million women, are denied a raise. Every minute Mitch McConnell obstructs VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, nearly 20 people are physically abused by an intimate partner. With every denial, delay, and obstruction, his allegiance to Donald Trump and special interests becomes clearer and clearer. This week, House Democrats will once again stand with the American people, passing legislation to protect older Americans from discrimination and to stop our students from being defrauded. Our message to the American people is that we will never stop working for you. Our message to Mitch McConnell is no one is fooled about where your allegiances lie. It is my privilege to be able to welcome two of our DPCC co-chairs, and I will hand it over to Matt Cartwright.
Thank you, Vice Chair Clark and Chairman Jeffries. Ladies and gentlemen, the current House majority was won because we promised to work for the people, for the regular, working, ordinary American people. That's who we promised to stick up for, and this is a promise that we've been keeping. We promised to clean up government. H.R. 1 takes bold steps in that direction. We promised to bring down the skyrocketing costs of pharmaceutical medications. We've done that. We promised to fight the current administration's efforts to dismantle health care for people with pre-existing conditions. It was astonishing when we learned last spring that the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, decided to throw the full weight of our American Justice Department behind an effort to invalidate the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. I was astonished to learn that, and when I asked the Attorney General myself, what happens if you win the lawsuit, what's your plan? He said, well, that's not our department. And Vice Chair Clark is right. We're talking about upwards of 80 million Americans. I've heard as high as 130 million Americans with pre-existing conditions who are left on tenterhooks while we wait for the Fifth Circuit and the District Court in that case to sort things out. But the Justice Department is pushing to take their protections away. It's astonishing, with no plan to replace it. We've done these things, and we have worked for the kitchen table, pocketbook issues for ordinary Americans. We have passed, for the first time in 10 years, a raise in the minimum wage. And we can talk all day about the unemployment rate, but what you really want to know about is whether people can clothe and feed and shelter themselves and their families on what they make. And what we know is that they have to do it on more than one job unless we raise the minimum wage. We've done that. We have passed the FAIR Act, which helps people in employment situations protect their rights to go to court by invalidating forced arbitration clauses in employment agreements. So people with harassment in the workplace issues, wage theft issues, and a whole range of other people who have had their rights to go to court taken away, the FAIR Act, Hank Johnson's bill that we passed, remedies that situation. And we passed the USMCA after a whole year of Richie Neal's tireless efforts to meet with the Mexicans, to meet with the Canadians, and strengthen what was given to us by the administration. Take out, for example, a completely superfluous and unnecessary provision that unnaturally jacks up pharmaceutical prices. Canada didn't ask for that. Mexico didn't ask for that. Who asked for that? Big Pharma asked for it, and we took it out to pass USMCA, a bill that helps American workers and American farmers. We did that, the Democratic House. So I'm here to say, ladies and gentlemen, we've done these things. These are just examples of the 275 plus bipartisan bills that we have passed out of the House that sit unattended on the desk of Senator Mitch McConnell, who has vowed not even to look at these things, let alone pass them or take them up or negotiate them. It's a sin, what he's doing, and he's doing it all with a view toward forwarding this false narrative that this is a do-nothing House. It's a do-nothing Senate Majority Leader. That's what we have, and he's proud of it. So I'm here to say I'm very proud to have advanced what we promised to do, the For the People agenda, and I urge Senator McConnell, do your job. I want to turn it over to my co-chair, Ted Lieu of California.
Thank you, Congressman Cartwright, and thank you, Chairman Jeffries and Vice Chair Clark, for having us here today. Like millions of Americans, I now also have a pre-existing condition, and I also get my health care through Obamacare. And the Trump administration is suing to eliminate health coverage for Americans with pre-existing conditions. And as Congressman Cartwright said, if that lawsuit succeeds, they have no plan. That means millions of Americans will lose their health care coverage, including those who rely on it for their pre-existing conditions. We're going to put people's lives at stake. And the Affordable Care Act does more than cover pre-existing conditions. It also applies to people who have employer-based health care and strengthens those plans. So before the Affordable Care Act, you could, in fact, go bankrupt, let's say, if you had a cancer diagnosis or something that caused a lot of money, because insurance companies could put in maximum coverage benefits in those employer-based health care plans. The ACA eliminated that for insurance companies. So as a result, everyone is covered regardless of what kind of health symptoms they may have or health diseases. If that goes away, again, it puts millions of people's lives at stake and could force them to go into bankruptcy. So in addition to the ACA, Republicans are also holding up bills that would help lower prescription drug prices and generic drug prices. Last year, the House of Representatives passed on a bipartisan basis a large number of bills to lower generic drug prices, and then we passed H.R. 3, which will lower prescription drug prices. They're all sitting on Senator McConnell's desk. And I'm going to conclude now about veterans bills. So in addition to health care, we've also passed at least 25 bipartisan veterans bills that help veterans combat suicide, bills that help veterans get jobs and transition easier, bills that are common sense. Some of them have Republican sponsors. Some of them are Republican bills. Many of them have Republican counterparts in the Senate. They're all sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. So we're simply asking the U.S. Senate to do their job, put these bills up for a vote, and then move the American family forward. Thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Matt. Questions?
Everyone's going to have lots of impeachment questions, so I'm going to start with Puerto Rico. What can you do? What are you considering?
That's greatly appreciated, by the way.
What can you do and what are you considering, and what are the get aid moving to Puerto Rico?
Yeah, we're going to have a series of conversations led by the Speaker, Steny Hoyer, with substantial leadership and involvement from Congressman Darren Soto, of course, Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez, who spoke with great passion today about the crisis confronting the people in Puerto Rico. We're going to use an all-hands-on-deck approach. And the president's refusal to spend a dime on these American citizens who are in peril is just a stunning abdication of his responsibility. It's unacceptable, it's un-American, and it's unconscionable, and we're going to make those points loudly and clearly to the American people. We're also going to explore our legal options, as well as the options that we have available as a separate and co-equal branch of government. In fact, a first amongst equals as it relates to our placement in Article 1 and the origination clause of the Constitution, which gives Congress and the House the sole power of the purse. And the president, again, is once again behaving like an authoritarian dictator, and it's shameful.
I just wanted to add to that about Puerto Rico, where we have 3.5 million Americans waiting for this government, for their U.S. government to respond to their needs. We had a hearing on appropriations back in the fall where we had the Trump administration come in after they missed their legal requirement to release the aid that had been appropriated by September to begin the process of putting this aid into the hands of Puerto Ricans. They had no answer for why this was not being done. And so, as the chairman said, we are also going to explore our legal options on ways to force this administration to abide by the law, by what Congress has appropriated, and to do right by the Americans that live in Puerto Rico.
I have two related questions. One is, does the House have any plans to subpoena Bolton? And the news about the Burisma cyber attack, how does that influence or have any role or impact on impeachment and this broader story?
Two very important questions. There has been no decision made as it relates to whether the House will consider subpoenaing John Bolton. Nothing has been ruled in, nothing has been ruled out. But at the present moment, the ball is in the Senate's court. And as was detailed in an extraordinary fashion by Ted Lieu and Matt Cartwright, what is the Senate doing such that they don't have time on the calendar to hear from witnesses like John Bolton and Mick Mulvaney? We have sent over 400 bills, 275 of which are bipartisan in nature. We've sent over bills to protect people with pre-existing conditions, strengthen the Affordable Care Act, drive down the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs, address the gun violence epidemic, reauthorize the Violence Against Women's Act, defend the Dreamers and create a pathway towards citizenship, increase pay for everyday Americans, confront the climate crisis, defend our democracy in the era of voter suppression once and for all. The Senate is not taking up any of those bills. What are they doing? Such that they do not have time, apparently, to hear from John Bolton or Mick Mulvaney or review documents. It's part of a cover-up because Moscow Mitch and the Senate Republicans cannot defend President Trump's stunning abuse of power and his shakedown scheme in pressuring a foreign government to target an American citizen. We are going to look at the most recent revelation as it relates to Russia's cyber attack on Burisma and entities within a sovereign Ukraine. But as the Speaker has indicated on several occasions, all roads seem to lead to Putin as it relates to this administration. And Vladimir Putin appears to be at it again as it relates to potentially manufacturing evidence to interfere in our election in 2020 to help his buddy, Donald Trump, again, be artificially placed in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That would be a disgrace. Yeah. Brooklyn is always in the house. Okay. All right. Cheryl, don't spoil the party here.
Republican leader McCarthy indicated that he thought that Joe Biden should suspend his campaign if you're going to have 4 Democratic senators running for president having to sit. Is there
Who said that?
Kevin McCarthy?
Who?
He's not from Brooklyn.
Okay.
Is there any indication? Do you think that there's any fair way to do this across the board for the DNC and the Democratic Party if you're going to have the bulk of your field here? That there's any way to say, all right, how do we handle this as a party so that each of those candidates get the fairest field if they have duties across the board?
Yeah, I'm going to yield to my colleagues. We're going to continue, hopefully as a party, to affirmatively talk about creating prosperity in every single zip code for every single American. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. We will not take political advice from Kevin McCarthy. I yield to my colleagues.
Me neither.
Is there a concern about being fair to the other candidates if they have responsibilities here for the trial?
Well, I would just say that I think that the senators who are running for president are perfectly clear, unlike the Republican senators, where their oath of office is. It's to the Constitution. They will be there. They will do what they are supposed to do, and they will take that oath of impartiality with a clear conscience.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is I think the House Democrats have really provided a great model for this, because at the time that we engaged in our impeachment inquiry and our final impeachment vote, all throughout that we also had one of the most successful and productive House sessions in modern history, passing nearly 400 and slightly over 400 pieces of legislation, 275 bipartisan bills that address the urgent priorities of the American people. So I think we can have the same confidence that our Senate colleagues will do both things, continue to deliver on the commitments they've made to the American people, as well as hold this president accountable and fulfill both responsibilities.
We're going to go back to the front row, but I want to be fair. Yeah.
Mr. Jeffries, we reported yesterday that the administration is preparing to transfer another $7 billion from border wall construction out of military construction and counter drug. What's your reaction to that? What are the House's options at this point? And should you guys have fought harder to include language preventing them from transferring that money in the recent appropriations legislation?
Well, we're going to continue to evaluate our options as it relates to dealing with Donald Trump's relentless and reckless effort to build an unnecessary and medieval border wall. Clearly what we see is this is another example of Donald Trump trying to fulfill a political promise that he made to crowds throughout the campaign in 2016 that has nothing to do with the safety and security of the American people. It was an issue that was briefly discussed in the caucus meeting today. Those discussions will certainly continue.
One question on impeachment, one not on impeachment. Not on impeachment, what's your response to this idea now that not only were State Department officials not notified about an imminent attack on these 4 U.S. embassies, but also President Trump saying it doesn't matter anymore, it doesn't really matter if it was imminent or not. And then on impeachment, can you talk about the importance of the role of the impeachment managers, this sort of high stakes that they have in terms of trying to make their case in the Senate, and whether you think you do a good job as well?
I have no expectation to serve as an impeachment manager. I have a day job, and I look forward to continuing in that day job as chair of this tremendous House Democratic Caucus to continue to advance our For the People agenda, keep the focus on health care, infrastructure, and, of course, cleaning up corruption in Washington. Anyone else want to respond to that particular question?
And the importance of the role of these managers, it's a high stakes situation, right?
Yeah. Well, we have a tremendous number of very capable individuals, particularly who serve on the Intel Committee and the Judiciary Committee, led by Chairman Adam Schiff, as well as Chairman Jerry Nadler. It's my expectation, though it's the Speaker's call, and we have complete confidence in her, that Chairman Schiff and Chairman Nadler will play a prominent role in carrying the message over in the Senate in the context of a trial. There are also two very distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee who are here today, who I would expect, or certainly would be tremendous impeachment managers. But again, that is a question to be addressed by Speaker Pelosi. We'll get to the second.
I want to add my 2 cents to the question about consulting with Congress. It's a disappointment to me that the administration feels the need to bend over backwards not to consult with the Congress. I don't know why they do that. There are, at least with the Gang of Eight, I mean, you think about the breadth of experience and the wisdom and the knowledge that these people could add to the discussion. And for the administration to assume that they're going to oppose whatever the administration leans towards, it's a fallacy. It's wrong, it's short-sighted, and it's a disappointment to me that they do that.
Thank you. So both the Attorney General and the President have suggested that imminence isn't required. I urge both of them to read the United States Constitution, because the way it works is only Congress has the power to declare war. So before the President can engage in warlike actions, he has to get an authorization for the use of force. There's only 2 that Congress has passed: 2001 AUMF, 2002 AUMF. One applies to Iraq, and the other applies to terrorists connected to 9/11, none of which would have authorized the use of force by Donald Trump. As a result, the only other way the President can use force is for self-defense under Article 2 of the Constitution. That requires imminence. So for the President and Attorney General to say that that's no longer required, they're essentially saying they're engaging in unconstitutional, illegal actions, and that is unfortunate, and I think the American people understand it for what it is.
I just wanted to add that we talked about in caucus today that the 4 founding fathers foresaw that we may have a rogue president, which we do. But what they didn't foresee is that Congress would also be rogue. And what we are seeing is an abdication by my colleagues across the aisle to our role in asserting in a democracy, under the way our Constitution framework works, is that we are the ones who can declare war. We have the power of appropriations and the purse, and we have to stick up for that, and we have to assert that role and protect it, because it is vital to protecting the American people. And it is a system that works together, but you have to remember that we pledge allegiance to a republic and not to a specific president.
I think one thing is also important to remember is part of the reason congressional approval and consultation is required is because you want Congress to ask the tough questions. Will this action make the American people safer? Will it strengthen American national security interests around the world? And that the absence of those tough questions is what invites mistakes or a failure to understand the broad implications of an action. I think that's what we're seeing. So this is not just about congressional authority, which is clearly present, but it's really about making certain that when you make such a solemn decision to use military force to begin a war, that it be done after careful deliberation with all the hard questions asked. That did not happen in this case.
And to wrap this up, and then I'll go to you, Cheryl, but Congress is a separate and co-equal branch of government. We don't work for this president or any president. We work for the American people. We have a constitutional responsibility to serve as a check and balance on a potentially out-of-control executive branch. That is the formula that the framers of the Constitution came up with, because they didn't want a monarch, they didn't want a dictator, they didn't want a king, they wanted a democratic republic. There is nothing more important than issues of war and peace. That is why Article 1 of the Constitution makes clear that Congress has the sole authority to declare war. As my colleagues have indicated, the only exception to that, in the absence of an authorization for the use of military force, is an imminent threat to the safety and well-being of Americans. The president has now proclaimed that doesn't matter. He essentially has indicated he's a king, he's a dictator, he's a monarch. And he can start a war if he wants it without consultation or the approval of the American people. That is a stunningly unconstitutional admission that he has made to the American people. And people of goodwill, Democrats, Republicans, and independents should be shocked by the behavior that we're seeing from this president and the fact that he's willing to lie, apparently, about the alleged nature of the threat that prompted him to strike General Soleimani. No one that I've spoken to has seen any evidence, apparently including the Secretary of the Department of Defense, that there were 4 specific embassies that were under imminent threat.
So the Speaker indicated that she was withholding the articles of impeachment in order to, in essence, get Mitch McConnell to commit to witnesses and documents. And he hasn't done that. So what's changed to make her decide to send these articles over now?
Well, the Speaker never indicated that her objective was to get Mitch McConnell to change his behavior. She made it clear that part of our objective collectively as House Democrats was to make sure there was a fair trial in the Senate. There's a distinction because as it relates to the trial proceedings, unlike Mitch McConnell's ability essentially to block all of the bills that we have passed in the House on behalf of everyday Americans to make life better for them, he has that singular ability in the Senate. Mitch McConnell does not have that singular ability in the context of the impeachment and removal trial, because effectively it will take 51 senators to make a decision as to what the trial would look like. And so the Speaker's decision has created space for individuals like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, and most recently, Mitt Romney, to publicly and expressly say individuals like John Bolton should testify if the Senate is going to conduct a fair trial. So we are 3/4 of the way to seeing a fair and comprehensive trial in the Senate as it relates to Donald Trump's abuse of power. That alone was a tremendous objective that has been accomplished, because what Mitch McConnell apparently wanted to do was move immediately to dismiss any impeachment articles that we sent over.
Who's the last 1/4 of that?
We'll see.
And do you think you'll get one?
Hope springs eternal.
That doesn't sound very optimistic.
We'll see what happens in the Senate, but I think there's been substantial movement. That's a good thing. And we still need to hear from individuals like Martha McSally, Joni Ernst, as well as Cory Gardner, of course, amongst several others, Lamar Alexander. There are any number of individuals who hopefully decency will prevail.
Michael Bloomberg told us in Texas over the weekend he might spend up to $1 billion of his own dollars, even if he's not the nominee, to help the party, to help whoever the candidate is. Wonder what you feel about that much money from one individual. Is there a limit? Would you be happy for $5 billion of his dollars, $20 billion, before someone becomes, as you say, a king, a dictator, and a monarch?
Well, obviously, I think that Michael Bloomberg's entry into the race, personally as a New Yorker, and then I yield to all of my colleagues, has been an important step in a broad field to articulate part of the Democratic perspective amongst the ideologically gorgeous mosaic that we have from the center to the left. And the American people deserve a robust discussion because we're in a very challenging moment about how we move the country forward. And Michael Bloomberg will have a lot to say in that regard. The way the current campaign finance laws are written, he's got the First Amendment right to spend his resources in a manner that he deems appropriate. And that's a right that he's chosen to exercise on behalf of his candidacy and potentially on behalf of the effort to make sure that we move as a country in a different direction beyond Donald Trump. I support that effort to the extent that I support the fact that the country needs to move beyond this current presidency that we have right now.
Anyone else?
Anyone else?
Is there a limit? limit to how much one individual, what do you get for $1 billion?
I mean, I would just add to the chairman's comments that, former Mayor Bloomberg is also investing substantially in voter registration efforts in key battleground states. I think his commitment to spend what he has earned in his lifetime is a recognition of his assessment of the danger of a second term of Donald Trump. And I think to the extent that he's willing to commit resources to make certain that the Democratic nominee, whoever it is, prevails, I'm grateful for that. And I think Mayor Bloomberg has a long record of investing in. I was a founding member of Mayors Against Illegal Guns with Mayor Bloomberg. He has a long record in investing in environmental efforts to respond to climate change. So I think this is an unusual moment in the history of our country, and I think devoting resources to ensuring that the Democratic nominee for president wins is essential.
So the House passed H.R. 1, campaign finance reform, because we saw the effect of money in politics. But until folks really get upset about Sheldon Adelson, the Koch brothers, corporate super PACs, Republican super PACs spending vast amounts of money, I simply reject the premise of your question.
You, Ted. Last question?
This is a non-impeachment question for Congressman Cicilline. Can you update us on the status of the antitrust investigation that's going on in the House? I know you have a field hearing on Friday, but when do you expect to wrap up that investigation? And are you still talking to big tech CEOs on potentially coming to testify?
Yes, so the investigation, I hope, will conclude in the first quarter of this year with the expectation that we will have a final report and a set of recommendations early enough to be able to move forward with the introduction of legislation. We have a field hearing in Colorado. We'll probably have at least one or two more hearings, maybe one additional roundtable. What has been very exciting is this has really been a bipartisan effort, and the expectation is, while we may not agree on every solution, that we'll have a set of proposals that enjoy bipartisan support. And as I've said throughout the investigation, it is hard for me to imagine we would complete this investigation without hearing from some of the key CEOs of the major technology companies. They have all pledged to cooperate, and they have been in terms of document productions and other things. So it is my expectation that some set of CEOs will be heard from before the investigation is completely concluded.
Yeah, House Democrats, we're going to continue to fight for working families, middle-class folks, and senior citizens. We're going to continue to fight for the poor, the sick, and the afflicted. We're going to continue to fight for the least, the lost, and the left behind. We're going to continue to defend our democracy. We're going to continue to fight for the people. Thank you.